Hello,
Hi.
we're the tarot dealers.
We are the
Yeah, I'm
champions.
Tren and this is Lou. And this is Theo. We have a special guest today, and he's
Mhm.
going to be talking about the Lamont. I can never say the Lenormand.
Well, that's the general topic. That's what we're getting.
Yeah, we're going to learn a lot because we don't really know a lot about this.
Exactly.
We can see the
Yeah.
themes that run
Yeah.
through, and I'm fascinated in the history.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I'm also wanting to show some of the innovation in technology in card reading, which we
Yeah.
use a weight, but we'll do a bit of a history lesson in some regard. So if we
Mhm.
we'll just start.
We'll just start.
So
Yeah.
we'll start in 1770.
1770.
1770. So if we go back to, and this is all in Paris and France in a context of the innovation around oracle cards in Paris just before the French Revolution.
Oracle cards.
Oracle
Yeah.
cards.
Okay.
And I mean, I saw that in the most broadest context.
Okay.
And so in 1770, what you would predominantly find, and what was really significant as a card deck that came out was playing cards. If you went into a pub or a
Yeah.
tavern or something and you saw somebody playing with cards, it wouldn't be tarot.
It'd be
It would
No.
be playing
Playing
cards.
cards.
And you've got the whole gypsy aspect. And so we talk about A8 and it's featured really heavily in this channel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the equivalent in that 1700s period is a gentleman called Aliette. And so if you were in France in that time, you'd be talking about Aliette's cards, not A. Waite's
Yeah.
cards.
Okay.
And they're divided by like 120 years. What Aliette does is he publishes a deck of cards, and I'll show you one or two. You guys have some.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
I'll show you some to the audience. And so what's really awesome in these cards, and here's a really beautiful, I'll just talk about some of the innovation.
Yeah.
We have what we see in this deck, the playing card in the middle.
Yeah.
And then at the top of the card, if it's got an orientation, is the definition of as it is if it's up, and then if you reverse it, there's the definition there. So you see the reversals there. And then on the side, because it's playing cards, it has if you have two cards, if you have three cards, if you have four cards of jacks or whatever you. Okay, and so here's your essentially, so you would have bought this, you would have gone into his printery and you would have bought it as a sheet, and he would advertise it as a sheet, or as additional services, they would cut it for you into cards, or and an additional service, they would paint it with inks for you.
Oh.
So this is sort of what you wouldn't go and buy a deck of cards. You could if you paid top dollar,
Yeah.
but then you would this is what it would look like. What's really awesome. So let's just imagine 1770, you've gone into Elliot's printing house, you've bought a sheet, you've gone home and you cut it up with scissors. And this is your training deck. And you're going, okay, I'm learning how to use the cards. And as soon as you're competent, and specifically in the design of the cards, you then cut off the instructions, and then you have your playing cards.
Oh,
Which I think is awesome.
yeah.
It's like, do we see this today as an innovation where you're now going to cut that card out? So I don't need to know that Gargon Blanc is the Jack of Hearts. I know that now. I'm really competent. So I'm going to now cut out all the cards, and you'll end up with a set of playing cards. This is 1770. So he establishes and prints a deck which sort of solidifies then the references to Jack of Hearts is this, or the Ace of Diamonds is a letter. So you see the shape of a letter, and it's a diamond card, and so that's where you see that. So this is Aliette. So that's 1770. So in 1783, a Frenchman goes, hey, he gets hold of the Marseille deck, so we'll bring in our tarot. So the most common, if my understanding is a bit limited still, is then the most common tarot card deck, if only one, in France is the Marseille deck.
Yes.
It's been printed. There's lots of examples of it across quite a broad spectrum of time. And this French guy goes, oh, I actually think it's the Egyptian mysteries. And so we see the tarot cards referred to as the Book of Thoth.
Oh, yeah.
Back in this is 1783. And so what then Aliette does is in 1788, he then prints a deck of cards, which is his version of tarot cards. And what we see is not the typical symbolism of
Of what we
Marseille.
know.
Yeah, but there's certainly familial aspects to the deck. So you'll see in this card that he's taken some of the Marseille decks, such as the star cards. But this is 1788. This is just on the verge of the French Revolution. And there's all of this innovation going on. So it's redefining and, it's making a new deck of the symbolism, which is current to the late 1700s. So there's some old things and there's some new things in that regard. One of the other, sorry, I need to go back to 1770. One of the other great innovations specifically associated with Eliot is that he has this querient card. And so one of his innovations is he would add in a card to his deck where this is you.
Oh.
So it's not, I'm going to take out and say you're the Queen of Hearts and you're the Queen of Diamonds, and however that lays out, then that's the reference of the cards around you. He actually goes, but what happens if the Queen of Diamonds or the Queen of Hearts is somebody else in your life, and I've already occupied that as the defining card. So he adds in, he's the first guy that adds in the querient card, and he does that with his tarot card deck.
Oh, does he?
Yes. So there's a querient card in his tarot card deck. And what's really beautiful in one regard, and you'll see it in other decks, is the querient card in regards to the female is naked, because it's the naked truth. Which is really, a funny little playful symbolism. I mean, it's, you're playing with a few different things there. So there's an aspect around this, but we're still on the verge of the French Revolution. There's all this tumult of, new social arrangements. So at the same year, so we're talking about 1788 for the Eliot deck, or Eliot deck, at the same time as this rare deck, which doesn't have playing cards in it. And it's really one of the best examples of a fusion deck. So 1788, you see this deck, it's 76 cards, and the king and queen are Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI. So 1788, you know what's going to happen to them in 1793. I mean, these guys aren't going to fare very well. But just before the French Revolution, we see where's the power of the community, of the society around them. It's royalty. All of your major cards are ministers. And so, not only when you go back to these cards, there's some really awesome, if you like, late 1700s France fashion, then you see the fashion representative. But we see here the Minister of War. And here's the Minister of War in this French 1788 deck. They're the symbols of power. And so king and queen and all the ministers are the equivalent of the major arcana.
Right.
But at the same time, and we're heading towards Madame Lenormand and oracle decks. But in regards to this deck in 1788, you see the precursors of tarot, or you see the influence of tarot. You see the influence of oracle decks. So where you would find, so we've already talked about the king and queen and the ministers as a major arcana, you'll see cards that are really specific in regard to tarot. So the death card is a card that you would identify. Here I'm quickly flicking through to find it. Here we are. So La Mort. So here's the death card. Absolutely symbol of tarot card. And what's really fascinating in these earlier decks is the symbolism that's used. So here's the tiger card, and it is a card that you would recognize in tarot. This is the dog that bites the fool.
Right.
Oh, okay.
But in this deck, it's a tiger, and it represents, you're a fool, you're going on a journey. These are all the things that are following you, like your unresolved issues, and it's still biting you on the arse, sort of thing. So then in this deck, we also see really, we were saying we can identify the tarot cards, we can identify Lenormand cards, or the symbols of Lenormand cards in it as well. So here's the tower card for Lenormand, not the tarot card for tower. And so in this one deck, we see tarot cards, and we see Lenormand cards, and we see another card series which we don't really see much of, which is the Salon cards, where you see cards that are dominated, card decks that are dominated by people. So if you were to go into a salon in the 1780s, 1790s and get a card reading, it would be really common in the social circles to use a salon card. And what really defines them is they're a smaller deck, they're 32. And so you see then a deck that is, if I could do this, because I know for the audience, is they're all people. So you would literally have, I'll lay the cards out and here's the young man with brown hair, and the heart card, and another young man with dark hair, and you're falling in love, but there's a trap, and here's a woman, and it's all dominated by people. It's all young man, blonde, dark hair, brunette. It's like your court cards in a way, but it's very distinctive as a card deck, as a card deck dominated by people.
So I see on that deck, it's got, like in the corner, it's got like what looks like regular playing cards. So how does that relate?
So what you've seen where we look at the 1788 card, there's no playing cards. And so then you get a fusion of these cards with the 1770 cards. And so you're just in that 1780s, 1790s period, you're experimenting around. Like everybody's experimenting. Let's take tarot and add playing cards to it. Let's take salon cards, the people cards, and add playing cards to it. And aspects like that. Or let's just define tarot cards as well. And so what's really beautiful at this period is this fusion, is this experimentation, is this innovation, and where we can track through the evolution of certain symbols. And also, if there's one story between two decks, is before the French Revolution, it's 1788. We were looking at this with Marie Antoinette and King Louis XVI. They all get beheaded, right? So what happens to your power structures as a consequence of the French Revolution? Like, what happens when you decide to throw out all your major arcana out of tarot? Because that power structure is no longer representative. And we end up in a deck in 1795.
Okay.
So these two decks, 1788 with King Louis and 1795, they're only 7 years apart. And this is 2 years after King Louis and Marie Antoinette and all the ministers have been beheaded. And what you see is, well, what do we do now that we've beheaded our king? We then replace the symbols of power with mythology. And so we see the introduction, not the king and queen, but as Juno and Jupiter. And we return to mythology. And so you see the archetypes and the metaphors of the high priestess.
Just going to say that like emperor and empress.
Yes,
Right.
Where emperor and empress would have been then, the king and queen of France before the French Revolution. After the French Revolution, the mythology. Because I mean, who now that you've beheaded your power structures. But
That's interesting, isn't it? Because if we look at today's deck, like Arthur Edward Waite, like the Rider-Waite deck, then we would be looking at things like the Premier, the Treasurer. Right. If they were to change all that, got it.
What's really interesting in this? So this is a 1807 printing of a 1795 deck. The example that we have of the 1795 deck is missing its cards. So the history of cards is a bit fraught. You lose a card, you throw your deck out. So what we have is examples of and what I have is examples of complete decks.
Okay.
So where we have remnants of earlier decks, then I've used later decks, but the printing hasn't changed. And so in this 1795 deck, La Petite Oracles des Dames, or the small game of oracles for ladies, or the Recreation du Curieux, so the recreation of curious people. So it's not referred to as it's got oracle in its deck, and this is from 1807. And just like the 1788 deck, what we see is again symbols of both tarot and symbols of Lenormand cards. and symbols of the Samhain cards where you see people in them. It's a 42 card deck, but where we were saying in 1770, this is a bit of a rinser of a ride, isn't it? You've got reversals.
Yeah.
Yep.
In this deck, which is really beautiful, is the cards are reversible. So that you see in the hand you something, you can see then this. I mean, if you're trying to deal with what is reversals in cards, reversals of cards are from the beginning. 1770 has reversals.
That's right.
1795 has reversals. But there's also an aspect, and it's interesting because where we're heading towards is Lenormand, is coming up, and A weight is that when you have 78 cards, and these are all symbol cards, you see an evolution of cards being fused together. So, and an example of the Louis and Marie Antoinette card is there is a sorrow card and there is a death card. And in this 1795 deck, the Petite Oracle deck, you see them as reversals. So here's your death card with the old skeleton made with the scythe, and here's so I had it that one around, and here's your sorrow card.
So they're together.
They're together,
not separate cards.
no, and then this evolves just into the death card.
The death card.
So if you're looking at the history of the evolution of tarot cards, there are some cards in now a modern tarot card deck which are a result of fusion of symbols. So here's your sorrow of death as death upside down in that regard. And so then we start losing deck and we start losing cards, which is really, really fascinating. Also, because in context, Eliot has published in 1788 his tarot card deck, you see then the introduction, and this isn't an Eliot deck, this is published by, is it on the front? Oh yeah, it's published by the widow of Gouffier.
Oh,
so
widow.
It's widow because you're in 1795 and everybody's been beheaded. So what you literally see in this deck and in a lot of books is I am the widow of, which is what I mean. There's a reality to this, right? And we're getting to Lenormand in that regard. So you see then, where did I put that card down? You see a fusion of all the cards. If you go back to these earlier decks, you also see how the symbols themselves have changed. So there's the Wheel of Life deck from the late 1700s.
That's the world, right?
Yeah. You can see the symbols there, but they've morphed. So in the Petite Oracles deck, the Wheel of Life is run by mice and whipped on by a monkey, and it's all about like the daily grind. There's a bit of, but then the reversal of that is fortune, which is just, I mean, when you go back and look at the symbols that we use today, but then here's one really beautiful one. If you want a great example of a symbol that's changed that we use, that you'll be familiar with in A weight, you would say, oh, there's the tower card for the moon. Here's the two towers, here's the dogs, there's the scorpion. And what's that rainbow looking thing? And what's that bright thing at nighttime? But this is a solar card. That rainbow looking thing is actually the Tropic of Capricorn and Tropic of Cancer. And it's the equinox moment. The sun goes over the Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn, and it's a moment of balance between two towers. So that two towers symbol back in 1795 has solar references of the equinoxes. So there's great things. We see again, so this is an Eliot card, but here's the querient. Here's the naked woman again, naked to the truth of her fortune. But then the opposite of it, the reversal is the male, which is this amorphous cloud mystery. I've never quite worked out why that's the male one. Anyway, there's some mysteries that are still yet to be defined. But this, I really like this Petite Oracles deck from 1795 because it's 2 years after everybody gets beheaded as well.
It's very new, isn't it? Fresh.
But I mean, you think of the time of the French Revolution in Paris, and just the tumultuous period. So
Yeah.
Lenormand comes along, Madame Marie and Adelaide Lenormand. She was 16, I think it was, when the Bastille fell.
16.
16 when the Bastille fell. She was a country woman that went to Paris to make her fortune, and she couldn't afford. So the Elliott cards that we were talking about, you could buy them as a sheet, you could buy them cut up, you can buy them painted. And she was a seamstress of sorts. I'm simplifying her life.
Yeah.
And this hand painted deck was like 3 weeks worth of wages for somebody. I mean, it was a bit exclusive. But so she starts using playing cards.
Okay.
We don't have her original decks or anything because her nephew inherited her estate, and he was a strong Catholic military guy and burnt everything. So there's a bit of tragedy in the story. But we can get all of these cards during the period of her life, and this is certainly what we're talking about. And we end up in well, I'll use my modern deck of 36 cards, which have the playing card in the corner, and it's 36 different symbols.
The guillotine.
Yeah. So this is a French Revolutionary themed Lenormand deck. I mean, why I really love Lenormand is that of archetypal models of a card reader, a woman in Paris that survived the French Revolution, the Reign of Terror, the Napoleonic era, and the French Restoration, and then post that. And she was a famous card reader and survived and prospered and had a salon and had a publishing house and had a reputation. And she courted, she was one of the main readers for Napoleon's partner.
Josephine.
Yes.
Josephine. Okay. Yeah.
And she was really famous as Josephine's reader, to the extent that if you go back to that time, people were worried about how much influence Madame Lenormand had on Josephine, because Madame Josephine would be going to Madame Lenormand more than once weekly, sort of thing. But then after she dies, her fame plummets to some extent. She goes into publishing, and so what we have now is examples of what we now know as the modern Lenormand deck is actually a German deck. And there's this whole, we won't go into the German history of it, because what we're really wanting to look at is the context of the French card publishing scene. So near the end of her life, there's all these cards that start getting published, both in Paris and in Germany, trying to make money out of the prosperity. There's one woman that lived 2 or 3 blocks away from where she lived that writes a book about all of her knowledge, because she used to take on students, and also published a deck. And so what we see is there are 2 decks, just like Elliott beforehand, where the 1770 deck is the playing cards, and then a few years later he does his tarot cards. So this is the petite, the small game, playing cards, because it's only 32 cards. And this is the La Grande game, the great game, and it has 76 cards. You see that also in Lenormand, where there's the petite deck, which is, in the case of Madame Lenormand, is 36 cards, and La Grande, which is 52 cards.
Okay.
And this is published by a woman that was a student of Lenormand. And so this is the La Grande Jeu de Madame Lenormand. And what you find, and this is published by
Thank you.
I don't remember if she's a widow or not. If the readers at home and the people on the video are watching it, it's a fusion of all of her knowledge. It's everything. It's like, I'm going to write a summary of everything in my life, and put it all in one card deck. So what's interesting is you've got the playing cards.
You've got the playing
cards in the top corner. You've got the central theme in the middle. You've got the astrology at the top with all the constellations. You have your flower emblems, so the language of flowers. And then what's beautiful in regard to when we were talking about reversals, up or down, you've got left and right. So in the corners, you have, if the cards are on your right, it's influenced by that corner. If the cards are on the left, it's influenced by this corner. So there's a beautiful little innovation in the way these cards are created. But the central theme of the main card are all these different myths. to understand where these cards come from, we have to pull in another technology in cards that were around that time. Sorry, I should have introduced. So these are published in 1835.
Oh, so quite late.
Yeah, and Madame Lenormand is no longer, majorly famous. She's still famous, but she's no longer in the dress circles. She doesn't die until 1842, I should say.
Yeah.
But this cards that are being published around from 1820, 1830, and in this case 1835, are claiming to be the cards that Madame Lenormand uses. It's this. I'm sure there's enough analogies today. We have to bring in, so we were talking about salon cards, which are dominated by people. We're talking about tarot cards, which come from Marseille deck. We're talking about playing cards, you'll be familiar with. We have to bring in another card technology, which is your educational cards. And so during this period, if you think of cards being like a teaching deck, you can't afford a book, here's a card. Here's a card deck. And so what we have in this example is a published set of cards from 1810, which are all the myths. And so you flick through it, and here is Pluto and Proserpine, and it's a little story about their myth. And so you have 25 cards. Here's Mercury and Isis. And it's the little story. So if you wanted to understand the myths, here's your card deck. And so you can just flick through it. So cards as a technology is in parallel industries. We're talking about tarot cards and what have you, but there's we think about today, we use business cards. It's a card sort of thing. There's this whole stream of educational cards. So this is an example of the mythology deck. And I specifically chose that because this then relates to Legrand's Madame Lenormand cards, because you can see here is Hercules with the fleece. How do we put that into context? Is they're referring to this card deck of the mythology. So the myths and the stories and the narratives of the mythologies are played out in your oracle cards, just as, and in consequence to, you've gone and beheaded your royalty, and now you're putting in a mythology character.
So it's all tying together, isn't it?
It beautifully ties together. And this is a period of 1770 to, in the furthest extent, 1835 sort of thing.
Wow. So I think I've got
It's a bit of a quick journey, isn't it? We can go back to some of this as well.
I've got some little decks. I might just go grab them and see if you can explain some of that stuff, because I have no idea about them. So I'm going to go grab them and I'll be back.
Well, you'll go. And we go sort of further down the rabbit hole. What's really interesting is that, if we just look at card number. So you start an example, the 1770 card deck is 32 cards. But if you think about it as a playing cards, it's set in its number. Because you're going to 32, you're going down all the way to all of the sixes. You add another 4 cards, and you add another 4 cards, and that's where you end up in the normal 36. It's all divisible by 4. Sort of thing. So there's that. You're back.
I am. I'm back. So these.
Yes. It's essentially the same thing, which is beautiful. So this is in the first, so we have to tie it. So this is probably, if somebody was to Google Lenormand, or if you're familiar with Lenormand, this is a card deck that you would most commonly see. 36 cards, and we've already sort of foreshadowed that they're divisible by 4s. In this early 1770 deck, it's 32. You add another 4 cards, and you get to 36. And you can add to that until you get to 52 and further. So what's really interesting is you got to think of the European trade and technology. And, if we have an analogy of, a modern analogy of manufacturing cars, the printing houses of Germany were, there was a competition for the technology. And this is late 1800s. And hey, I hear over in Paris that Madame Lenormand cards are really popular, sort of thing. Well, let's just go and saturate the market with a printed card deck. And this is a German deck. This isn't a French example.
Okay.
And this is the modern Lenormand. Why do we end up with a German deck for a French woman?
Yeah.
It's
Wow,
about the
yeah, good
power
question.
of industry.
Wow.
Why do we have, from an Australian perspective, a Japanese cards? All of our cars are now imported. We don't manufacture cars in Australia.
Okay.
It's a bit of a
Yeah.
time stamp.
So is this other one German as well?
As an underlying symbolism.
Right. Okay.
All of modern 36 cards, well, most of modern 36 cards for that style. But what's really fun is that you can see then, if we go, so the German deck that this is based on is called the Game of Hope. It was a playing card. You know, when they have that example, oh, tarot cards are playing cards. Yeah. Certainly playing cards are playing cards. Yeah. And the Game of Hope is the precursor for Lenormand in Germany.
Right.
Yeah, so we're outside of Paris and what have you. And it's purely the publishing power of this. But not only that, when this becomes really popular, you find in the 1850s, after Lenormand's died, the French printing houses start publishing this deck as well because it's so popular. Oh, it's like, social media in the early 1800s. But we can take certain symbols from this. So let's just randomly take, here's I can do the letter actually. If I quickly sort through this, we're talking about here's, oh no, this is the German one. Let's just use house. So and we were talking about this. Here's the King of Hearts we had in our previous episode.
Yes, we did.
The mansion, mansion, or the house. So we can then go back to, in the example of, that was easy to find, wasn't it? So here is a salon card deck, different playing card, because let's not get into the rabbit hole of what playing cards mean, sort of thing. But here's the French version of the house. Yeah, like the song. And we can find it as equally in all the way through other decks. I can try and flick through this one to find the house there. I thought I had it at the top. So there's similarities. It's like, yeah, it's really interesting. These decks, yeah. But what you find, and in regard to, I'm cautious of how far we're going for time, is that they're different skins on the same engine. If we think a computer game analogy. So the 36 cards, they're still houses, they're all houses. But in the innovation of which the Petit Oracle is, and everything that we've shown, is that there's all of this innovation that is at the foundation of the engine that's underneath the symbols. So you end up with, in this case, where we were talking about the death card before, where do we find the death card here in the German version of Lenormand is, it's going to be the last card, isn't it? There it is. So I wonder if I can quickly pick that one out where we got to. Here is the coffin. Okay. So where we're showing the fusion of the death card and the sorrow card. In the earlier decks, if we can quickly find wouldn't that be nice if it was on top? Then you don't, in Lenormand, you don't see the death used, you see the coffin of sorrow used. Okay. So there's a really fascinating history of how the symbols fuse as well. The bottom one. So here again, sorrow and death. There's your tarot card. Yeah. At the top, there's the Lenormand card of the woman weeping at the coffin. Sort of thing. It's really, when you go back to, it's a different playing card thing, but it's when you go back to looking at the innovation of where all of this came from. Where it originated. Yeah. So you've got this modern deck. I've forgotten when the Game of Hope is first published in Germany, but it really takes off in across Europe from the 1830s onward, 1850s, just as much as all these other decks. Yeah. We end up with, and just to bring it back to the A weight deck, is when you think of, and a nice sort of wrap up in regard to innovation and designing decks. Who designed this deck, we don't know. We've got other names there. But especially when we look at the spirit of card decks, is that jump forward 100 years, you're in the Golden Dawn and the post-Golden Dawn magical groups and OTO in Europe and what have you, and they're using tarot cards from a seed that is planted in 1783 of it is the Book of Thoth. So if you think of Aleister Crowley's deck, it's called the Book of Thoth. Edian refers to his card deck as the Book of Thoth. But in the the late 1800s, in the mystical order of the Golden Dawn and all these other little offshoots, if you think of A.E. Waite, if you think of Case, if you think of Dion Fortune, if you think of all these people that came out of that tumultuous innovation period, they all have their own decks. And Crowley has his own deck with Coleman, not Coleman Smith, what's her?
Well, Pamela Coleman Smith was the artist.
Frida Harris with because if you go back to one of the methods and one of the purposes for divinatory use of cards is that you would design your own.
Right.
And so inherent in the system is innovation.
Yes.
Sort of thing. So we'll leave it at that as a bit of a cliffhanger. Innovation is the message of the day.
How much have we loved that?
Yeah, that was a bit of a, you'll have to re-listen to it a bit. I think I've got all the text from these. I really like.
But that was quite fascinating.
There's a lot more.
You know, we're taught that tarot originated in France, what, 1400s, but now we're realizing Italy. But now I'm realizing in France it was really big.
At certain periods.
At certain periods.
Absolutely. Just before the French Revolution and during the French Revolution, this period of 1770 to 1810 especially. And then again in the late 1800s and into the 1910s before the First World War with Golden Dawn and OTO and Botan.
I find it interesting because we talk about evolution and things like that through the cards, and just in terms of how tarot has evolved. Over the last 10, 15 years even.
Well, even
seeing the introduction of new cards coming in. And you know, like here we go again, right?
Exactly.
And here we are at that
evolutionary
period, right?
aren't we?
So it'll be fascinating.
Interesting to see what
the decks are next after this period in time.
Yes, if you want to justify adding a card to your deck, you just have to very quickly look at the history of the decks. And I'm trying to find a collection. There's one. Okay, so we'll quickly talk about this 1788, the one with Louis, and we'll grab out the ship card out of Lenormand. If we can quickly find that. So there's a card called the ship, for journeys and all these things. We didn't talk about it previously. It's nice when you have 36 cards. You don't have to flick through 78 or whatever. It's second last.
Okay.
One. So in the German version of Madame Lenormand, card 3 is the ship. It's your journeys, what have you. Pulled up your anchor, you're on a grand journey. If we go back, and this is 1820 game of Hope again from the late 1700s in Germany. If we go back to the French equivalent of the 1788 deck that we have, there are 4 ship cards. 4 ship cards. And they've all been fused into one.
Into that one.
They're all been fused. So if we then, it's doing some heavy lifting. I'm going to lay out 36 cards and I have one card for the journey of ship. And you've got to put it in context. The ship is your major transport. So let's break it down. What were the 4 ship cards? And what's really beautiful, you have your ship under sail. That's awesome, right? Your wind's billowing, everything's perfect. You're going forward. Great hope card, and that's what you can see in the Lenormand card now. That's a ship under sail. That's great. But sometimes things don't go very well for you, and there's your shipwreck card. Everything's hit the rocks, sort of thing. Still a boat, you've lost all your cargo and what have you. But then, so that's shipwreck, and then there's the thing called the doldrums, where you're on your journey and there's no wind. and you're on a
So
sailing
just-
boat. And the doldrums is a term used for when you're at sea and there's no
There's
wind
nothing and you're sitting.
and you're sitting. Oh, and you have that, oh, it's
Yeah,
great,
you
we're on a
do.
journey, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just really sorry to tell you, sometimes you're in the doldrums.
Yeah.
And then the fourth card, and this is without getting into the wagons for this,
Yeah.
is here's your little community bus. Here's your grand sailing boat
Yeah.
between continents and stuff. Here's your little community
Oh, like
bus.
your ferry going.
Yeah. So here's
Goes
small
across the river.
journey, small routine going thing.
Wow.
And this is a suburban thing. And all of those cards are represented because there's 78 cards that you can use in that deck. And then, there's carriages and there's the anchor and what have you also in there. So in that regard, if you, from a simple perspective of, oh, I see so-and-so's gone and added extra cards in, sort of thing, then I mean, there's technology changes as well, I suppose, in that regard. We don't really think about sailing boats.
No.
Did you know that doldrums is a term used for when you don't have wind in your sails?
Not at all.
But you can see the consequence for it in your life.
Yeah.
Sure.
It's like, oh no. So that would be a great card. I imagine laying that down. Oh, why isn't my life going well? It's like,
you're in the doldrums.
yeah, in the doldrum. I'm sorry, sort of thing. So there's a practicality to it. That was an extended a bit, wasn't it? I mean, there's a rabbit hole here.
Yeah, there's definitely a rabbit hole
over
here.
hundreds of years, which leads us to 2026.
Yeah, exactly. And
This has just been absolutely fascinating. And I've seen the connections, which
there's dozens and dozens of connections, dozens. I mean,
but the history of it.
The history,
history
it's
is what I
rich.
like.
It's rich. Yeah.
And it enriches and gives you added narratives, added stories, added understanding in that regard. So and undoubtedly somebody else will come along with a new deck and go off on a different tangent. So,
Well, we've loved that.
well, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
The audience enjoyed it as well.
Yeah, let us know. Let us know what you learned, how you felt, if you want more. Yeah. Let us know. We've loved that.
Because we didn't even get into talking about the hymens, that we can leave that for another time.
Yeah,
We
I
can.
think we'll leave that for another time.
So from our heart to yours,
Yes.
big love.
See you later.